Data governance. Doesn't that sound like fun? For years, it was just a wish, a vision. But today, it can actually happen because the technologies and methods are there and the regulations are all around us. Tune into this episode of Future Proof to learn all about data governance.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Yours truly, Eric Cavanaugh here. And folks, we have an all-star cast for you today on the show. We're going to talk about a really hot topic these days, and it's not really a new topic, but it's new in how much people appreciate it all of a sudden. So we're going to talk about data governance. What gets governed, what data gets governed. The fact is it's the data that matters, right? So these days that data is a lot of data. So for the layman out there listening and wondering data governance, what on earth is that? Basically, what it boils down to is finding policies and protocols for being able to responsibly manage information as an asset. So which analysts should have access to this data versus that data? Maybe someone should have access to financial data, but not personally identifiable information, PII. Maybe someone should have access to marketing data, but not sales data, salary data, things of this nature. There are all sorts of data types. And for the right analyst who has the right authority and the right seniority, if you will, yes, that person should get access to all kinds of data. But what we're seeing is some really interesting developments in the marketplace. There's a whole new space that's opening up. There are several vendors in it. One of them is our sponsor for today, Okira. So big thanks to those folks for allowing us to bring you this content free of charge on your airwaves. Okira is doing dynamic governance, analytic governance. And what does that mean? So basically it means traditionally governance boiled down to access. Do you have access or don't you? That can typically be handled at the database level. It could be handled perhaps at the business intelligence layer or the application layer, but that involves giving credentials to people. And if you're a big company and you have hundreds or even thousands of potential analysts who are going to be looking at data, guess what? That manual process of doing it isn't going to work so well. And the other way you would do it is role-based. So going through whatever roles you have in your systems, in your corporate systems, like it's a director or above, or if you have the title of analyst, for example, then that gives you access. That's also an interesting way to do it, but it's also pretty brittle. And it doesn't really allow for exceptions. And so what we're now seeing is this whole concept of dynamic governance for analytics, where someone puts a query through, and then on the way back, an engine watches and waits and says, I'm not sure this person really deserves access to that information. And there are lots of different rules you can put into place to be able to effect that. But it's a very interesting solution, and it's one that's designed to scale. So we're going to find out about some of the challenges that you have in scaling these solutions today. First, we'll hear from Jonathan Andrews from Charter Communications. You might know their company as Spectrum. That's their go-to-market brand. We've got my good buddy Sanjeev Mohan on the line, an independent analyst in the space who's got a lot of experience from his Gartner days and even before, I'm sure. Steve Fazio from Talent is with us today, and I've got my co-host, Daniel Oberdeer, in the background. She's going to be joining us in segment 2. But let's go ahead and dive right in. So Jonathan Andrews of Charter, tell us a bit about yourself and what's this presentation you've given recently about privacy and governance and how they intersect.
Well, thanks for that, Eric. It's been a fun ride with Charter. Charter was a local cable company in the Midwest until about 5 years ago when we acquired Time Warner Cable and Bright House. And in the acquisition of two companies that were between them four times larger than we were, we all of a sudden increased our data footprint by several orders of magnitude, to the point where immediately following the merger, we had over 10,000 production databases. Wow. And no rationalization about what was in where, and needed to consolidate, needed to identify how we were going to manage this problem going forward. There was no formal process or thought of governance at that point. This was 2016. So we created the governance office to start addressing what's out there, how do we manage it, how do we want to address some of these concerns and establish some of the patterns that we have going forward.
Real quick. I mean, just so people understand, 10,000 production databases. What was I just saying about trying to manually manage access to those databases? Like, you send a ticket, a Jira ticket, and hey, I need access to this one database. Okay, good luck. It'll never, ever happen. So in a case like that, you probably have lots of people who have access to data that it shouldn't have access to, right? So what did you do? How did you solve that?
Absolutely.
Also, by the way, Jonathan, since we are on this number of databases, can you also throw light on number of database technologies? Are the same database type or the different databases?
Oh, that would be far too easy if it were all 10,000 of one type. No, we were spread across the full spectrum. We had the full range of relational databases. We had SQL Server, we had some Sybase instances for a while, Oracle, Teradata. We had a full range of NoSQL databases. We had lots of totally unstructured data sets that were all that we had to consolidate together.
I see.
So the first process that we went through was trying to get a handle on what was there and so what was the technical metadata to define. My logic was I couldn't govern what I didn't know about.
Right.
And so we started the collection process of capturing that technical information, which yielded plus or minus 25 million attributes in an enterprise data catalog.
Wow. Plus or minus 25 million. Go ahead, Jonathan.
So then it was, okay, the business didn't care about the huge amount of a good portion of that because it was interim process, it was transactional. The business cared about the 10% that they were going to be consuming. So we started working from both ends. We started working from the technology side as to, hey, what's out there and how does it get there? How do we trace lineage between the systems? But we also focused from the business perspective on what data is ready for consumption. Charter has the vast majority of Charter's information runs through a business intelligence process, and they are the prime purveyors of consumable ready data. And they run the access controls for various teams to make that and provision those services out to the consumer. So we started to capturing from a business metadata standpoint how that information was generated, what it represented, and how it should be used. More importantly, or as importantly anyway, how it shouldn't be used.
Right.
Fitness for purpose is a huge thing because in a company of the size of Charter, it's very easy to think you're doing the right thing and get the wrong answer. So we started looking at how data sets were being managed, how they were being leveraged, and what we could do to help govern and improve the value of those data sets going forward.
Yeah, this is a huge challenge. And I remember talking to you about it a while ago, because the question is, of course, where do you begin, and then what do you do about that? How can you dial in and start making some changes? And it's somewhere in between, right? Can you talk about how you're sort of solving two things at once? You're solving the governance, but you're also solving the privacy. And the question then becomes, why were those ever two separate things? I mean, these are clearly related things. And by the way, security is also related as well, right?
Absolutely. It's a huge process that all three pieces have to play a part of. I always say that the handoff between data governance and information security is, we'll tell you what needs to be protected. Information security will tell you how to manage it and how to secure it. But that only works so far with the new laws that are coming into place. California's privacy law, CCPA, initial focus for how we needed to capture and present information. But the new laws, the new iterations with California version 2, the Consumer Privacy Protection Act and the Privacy Rights Act, Colorado's law, Virginia's law, omnibus legislation in a number of other states. I believe now we're up to 5 and soon to be possibly 6. We're starting to have to look at not only how is that data stored and processed and maintained, but how is it consumed? And especially as it comes to some of the personal identifying or sensitive personal information, is it being consumed in a way that is different from how it was intended when it was collected? And so now the regulations are putting in some new usage constraints, which really does go down to defining who has access to and what are they doing with the data that's out there.
Yeah, and can you talk about, because you had some news for me in the pre-show about how a lot of these other states are all rolling out some form of regulation around data and use of data and so forth. I know about the CCCP, California Consumer Privacy Act, out of California. I know, of course, of GDPR, from the General Data Protection Regulation out of the EU. And I know that New York tried, but apparently there are several other states that have already passed or are in the process of passing. Can you talk about that for a second?
Yes, there are 5 states currently. California provided in 2020. California provided California Privacy Protection Act (CCPA) that provided some initial rights for visibility of personal information to individual consumers. So that subsequent to that, California the California voters said that didn't go far enough, so they passed another ballot initiative that takes that, starting in January of 23, that takes that one step further and provides additional rights, additional transparency and visibility. Following that, Virginia, Colorado, Utah, most recently, as in last week, Connecticut, all have omnibus legislation that models after what California version 2 more or less looks like. There are some nuances and some differentiators, but basically they all provide transparency to the consumer about what data company has, the right to be forgotten, the right to correct information that you may have that's not right.
That's great.
When you've got 25 million attributes, you've got a lot of information that may or may not be correct. So we have to go through and find out how we're going to deal with these things.
Yeah.
And as we go through this, it's going to be an interesting process to see how we manage these changes and how we're able to manage access controls and maintain quality of the systems while we make some of these corrections.
Yeah, and real quick before I bring in Sanjeev, I remember when GDPR first came out and this right to be forgotten, and I thought to myself, boy, I know how data moves inside large organizations. You have people making copies of data for specific uses, whether it's some bespoke analytic solution or some way of enriching data. Who knows? The point is, my information in XYZ Corp comes in through one access point. Maybe it's a website or a transaction in the store, whatever it is. And it has a tendency to move all around and go all over the gosh darn place. And that can become very, very difficult to track down. So now I've got 12, 15, maybe 25 bits and pieces of data about me all over your organization. And how are you going to find that? I mean, there are some fun new ways that you see companies tackling this. Your phone number. People figured out everyone keeps their cell phone number. That was the last good thing Congress did, I think, about 20 years ago, is they said that you should be able to keep your phone number even if you change carriers. I'm old enough to remember that. But how do you deal with that? Because there's a lot of work that needs to get done to even figure out where my data is in your organization. What do you think, Jonathan?
And it's even more insidious than that. I mean, not only because we can identify and trace where we know data goes, but one of the things that we've discovered is that the best ETL tool on the market right now is Tableau. People will take a Tableau data set that they have access to. They'll take another Tableau data set that they have access to, download them into Excel, mash them up, and create a third data set, which has no controls, no governance, no standardization apart from what was applied to the original data.
And let's bring in Sanjeev to kind of comment on this. That's hilarious. The best ETL tool in the market is Tableau. What do you think about all that?
You know, I've never heard that before. This is the first time I'm hearing that. And, to some extent, I think we have a problem if only reason people can use Tableau as an ETL tool is because we failed at securing our data. If we had secured our data, then we wouldn't be in a situation where you have one Tableau dashboard, another Tableau dashboard, you bring it into Excel, do something, mash it up, third Tableau dashboard, and voila, you have data. That's a failure in protecting our data. It should have never reached that point, because if it has, then you can do the million other tools and things that you can play around with.
It's a failure in securing the data. It's a failure in governing. It's a failure in information management. It's a failure across the board.
It's a very exciting time for data governance. I was joking with Jonathan Andrews from Charter Communications before the show that it must be very exciting to be you, because you've known about this stuff for a long time and you've kind of watched the train coming down the tracks, and all of a sudden everyone's like, yay, we need governance. You're like, well, it's about time you guys showed up. We've been talking about this for a while. And Sanjeev, I'll bring you in to comment on it. It is now very doable. It was doable before, but it was complicated and it was difficult and manual. And I think we know that when you're a pragmatist, you respect the fact that if something is too difficult to do in the enterprise, people are just going to go around it. But I think that we're finally getting somewhere, right, Sanjeev?
Yeah. So there's something very amazing, wonderful has happened in this space. I want to keep talking about Jonathan's use case, because there is nothing better than a actual real life practical use case, because the proof is in the pudding if we can protect that. So how did we do it in the past and why it was not successful is because you got Jonathan mentioned Oracle, SQL Server, Teradata amongst structured, unstructured, semi-structured. So let's say you have Snowflake, you have MongoDB, you have all of these. So the problem is that each one of these databases has some sort of data access governance security built in. Otherwise, whether it's views or it's role-based access control, it doesn't matter. They've got to protect that data. So now you come to Charter Communications and you've got one of every kind. How many skills, technologies, how many roles and rules do you need? It is a phenomenally massive task to do. So we are going to Airside in 2 weeks. So one of the things that we will look at is how this whole policy definition is being broken away from the compute engine. So if we can do that, then hopefully, and this is where all these companies are playing now, I can now define a policy that is consistent. It meets my central governance requirements, whatever that may be. I write it once and I apply it to a different compute engine. I don't have to write it again over and over. That is a promise, and that is what's making a big difference.
Yeah, and maybe we'll bring in Steve Fazio from Talent as another experienced veteran in this space. And Steve, the fact is things have changed significantly. The cloud is a big part of this. The fact that we can scale out much easier. The fact that we separated compute from storage, for example. Thank you, Snowflake, and some other innovators out there for figuring that one out. And when I think about this, it reminds me a lot about metadata. And when I go back 20 plus years now, in my earliest days in this business, I would talk to all these different vendors and they would talk about their metadata repository. And back then I thought to myself, it's great that they all have their own metadata repositories, but wouldn't it be great if there was one metadata repository that they all use, because then you don't have to worry about reconciling everything. And of course, that's why we have master data management. But it's the same thing here with the governance and the policy, because if your policy is only applied to at the database level, for example, that's not good enough. You have to have something above that that can touch all these different systems. And that's really what we're talking about with this new way of doing things. But what do you think about that, Steve?
Yeah, I think Sanjeev, you stole my thunder. Policy management. Yeah, I mean, policies are, I kind of go back to metadata. Metadata is the bedrock and the foundation for everything. You can have a Porsche, right? But if you don't have gas to put in it, it's not going to go anywhere. That's like your metadata layer, right? If you don't have that metadata to bring in, and as Jonathan, you overfilled the tank, right? 91 octane, you had 10,000 tables. It was overflowing. How do you use it then, right? How do you use it monitoring it? Well, then you have your dashboard in the car, right? Kind of tells you how things are going, how fast you're going. Check engine light comes on. That's like somebody's using the Tableau as ETL. That's the check engine light, right? Somebody needs to tell you that, hold on a second, we're going to pull over because we might crash because, someone's giving out bad information. It's a couple, I have a ton of notes here. This is awesome. A couple things about what data, Sanjeev, you said, where do you start? And I love the analogy of let's start, well, what are you really using? And I kind of go back to the analogy of when my kid was young, we went to the dentist and he asked the dentist, which teeth do I brush? And the dentist replied, only the ones you want to keep. So I look at data the same way, right? What do you want to govern? Well, only the ones you really want to keep, only the ones that really matter. And how do you do that? And that's a matter of opinion sometimes, right? That the IT folks want to keep everything because they figure, well, we got it, let's catalog it, we're done. And I have come up with a lot of customers, Jonathan, you're not the only one, that the first thing out of their mouth, hey, what's your business? What are you trying to solve? And the guy will say, we're trying to solve the problem of cataloging 10,000 tables. Okay, well, that's actually a business problem. What are you actually trying to do? And then when you get down to it, it kind of rolls into the business of saying, hey, what we really need is, we just went through an M&A. We need to make sure we don't have duplicate data. We need to make sure we identify where PI is and all that. So now it gets us to the next level of three things. One is the augmentation and automation, automating that, not having somebody sit there and going, I always think of, they think it's somebody at a switchboard just going like, okay, that's data, that's PI, that's PII, that's PI, an actual person sitting there. Imagine how long that would take. As you know, 10,000 tables, 25 million rows, you can't do that. We cannot do it. And then as new sources come in, you got to be notified of it. There has to be a way of notifying that you have something new and automating the process of at least getting close with the conditional labeling, things like that, where labels are conditionally applied upon sampling and profiling, so that at least you have your stewards can have advanced warning. I like to say I would like to see somebody come up with like a data meteorologist, right? That knows what's coming and can warn the population that
Predictive analytics master.
That's exactly what it was, because as you said, so when people are starting to, if they have a catalog, they're looking for things, right? You have a search box. It's like Google, right? What do? They take in what people are looking for. If the catalog can use some kind of algorithms to say, hey, everybody's looking for this kind of data, let's be proactive and try to figure out where it's all coming from, who's responsible, whether there's PI, whether we can, all those types of things. And then that would kind of automate, I think Jonathan's problem is now I have this 10,000, but it ain't stopping. Right. It's going to keep growing and growing and growing. And unless you try to scale, like you said, and automate to that augmentation, it's important. The second thing that you mentioned, which is really important, which is just starting to be very popular, was like customized, granular, global, and object roles and responsibilities. A lot of times we've been kind of pigeonholed into whatever the technology gives you. Like, okay, you're a data steward and this is what you do. Well, not in my business. My business is I'm a data steward, I'm an engineer, I'm a data mesh, whatever it is. That has custom roles, and it comes down to what those roles can see and what they can govern. When that's automated and that's all tied together, then it makes risk and compliance easier, because then you know exactly, when you look at your lineage, you can see, oh, he's responsible for this group's responsible for this, and you can scale better. Hope that makes sense.
Yeah, and what you just, I think, stumbled upon there is something, it's somewhat conceptual at the moment, but I just came back from a ThoughtSpot conference. There's a company, Kaboola, which blew my mind. It's Keboola, what these folks are doing, and it's enabling data mesh. What you were just referring to is enabling a practical way of doing data mesh. Right? Because it's an interesting theory. And I think a lot of companies are now picking up on that, and they're trying to look at what they're doing and look these folks up. Kaboola, I saw Sanjay nodding his head over there. Sanjay, you familiar with those guys?
Yeah, I'm very familiar, out of Prague.
That's right. Yep.
My guys, amazing work. Yeah.
Yeah. Just layers of abstraction, right? New layers of abstraction. But what's cool is if you think about, in the old days, you could tap into the network, for example. If you look at some of the cooler technologies in the security space, like an extra hop, for example, will actually siphon off all your network traffic and use that information to build out a model of your entire information landscape and all the different applications, databases, where data is flowing around. That kind of thing could also be very useful in the governance space. And I think you're starting to kind of see it in some of the more robust hybrid cloud architectures. There's some pretty interesting things going on to be able to manage it, even sense, or even there's another space that's not even related technically, but I can't remember what it's called, but it deals with protecting information in email. So you send an email out, if it's got a credit card number in it, this system will catch that and say, nope, you're not supposed to be sending that anywhere, and it'll actually truncate it. So there are ways of doing all this stuff that are pretty interesting. Sanjeev, what do you think?
Yeah, so you raise an extremely important point, which one of the reasons why we have struggled with this space is because we get fixated on, let's go protect and secure sensitive data in Snowflake, let's say. Snowflake is top priority, Databricks is next, and then everything else. Now, for the buyer or the businesses, organizations, well, that doesn't solve my problem. You protected a database, but there are all kinds of backdoors to where the data is coming from.
That's right.
So,
Tableau.
yeah, that's where Tableau is such a wonderful thing, and so it's very important. And to answer your question, Eric, about email, for instance, or SharePoint data. In my opinion, that's a different problem. The problem is the same. We still have to protect it, but it's a different team, different department. I don't know anything about how do I protect sensitive data in Teams, for instance. But I do know that when it comes to DBMS, database management systems, then we need our product, our tool to have an ability to protect all kinds of data sources. And Jonathan, I wonder if in your process, if you've come across, Steve, I'm sure you've come across mainframe data. So there's a lot of legacy data out there, which has to be treated as with equal respect as a modern data source.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
Especially in finance, they're still using COBOL.
Yeah, go ahead, Jonathan. Yeah.
Wow.
The cable industry, one of the ugly histories of the truths of the cable industry is that we don't use modern enterprise management software, modern ERP. We run an old credit card processing system that was hybridized and turned into the cable biller nationwide. So there are two major platforms for billing technologies. One was a 90s client server program, and we phased that one out. But the other is this massive mainframe-based billing program that does all the corporate billing, provisioning, scheduling of resources, truck roll management. It's still the backbone of the industry in a lot of cases.
Wow.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's interesting.
To the 90s.
DLP is what I was trying to think of, by the way, data loss protection. And Sanjeev is right. It's a completely separate space. It's a completely separate use case. But guess what? It's getting at some of the same objectives, which are to protect the data. But Sanjeev is right. You wouldn't use like an Okira, for example, to deal with that, or Prevacera, or these other guys in that space. You would use a number of different technologies. But the point is that the goal is to protect the data. Sanjeev, go ahead.
So Eric, this is the crux of a huge problem, which is, who is the persona? What category? What is it that we are trying to secure? Because the personas for DLP and the persona for data access governance are very, very different. Data access governance policies are most likely written by business, and they're coded by a data engineer. DLP is done by, maybe there's a email administrator or some infrastructure and operations person, and they both have to kind of, like you said, the objective is the same, but they're different personas.
Yeah, that's right. And I just thought of something. I can't help myself. Maybe I'll be the first one to say it, maybe not. Governance as code. Come on, we've got infrastructure as code. We've got analytics as code. Are we going to have governance as code? I don't know.